That's such a cool gun. Wish I had one of those. Whoa. Time for an Enfield video.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. For those of you on here who don't know me, I also am a bit of a, well, there's no bit of it to it. I play a lot of video games. I'm a gamer. And video games can sometimes lead you to find out about some really interesting firearms, especially games that tend to be a little bit more based in realism. Nothing's really fully realistic, but based. Like the Battlefield series, and the recent Call of Duty titles are pretty good too. But Battlefield, especially Battlefield 1, was a great introduction for a lot of people to really cool World War I firearms that most people have never heard of. And as big of a gun guy as I am, I do have to say that that game actually got my interest peaked in the British No1 Mk3 SMLE Lee Enfield. This is one of my favorite old guns. I love old guns, especially old military surplus guns and service rifles. But this one's probably one of my favorites. It's just such a fun gun, a cool piece of history, and I'm not going to do like a really deep dive on this video. It's just for fun today. We're going to talk about probably one of my favorite military rifles. I'm going to show it off, show you little things about it, and tell you what it's all about. So check it out. Here we go. So first things first, what is the No1 Mk3 SMLE? Well, it is a rifle, and it's a British service rifle that served for many years. Mostly during World War I, but I do believe in some regards it went on beyond that in British service history. Anybody watching this video that knows more about that than I do, correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong. But I do know that many countries around the world adopted it and used it way beyond when it was decommissioned for service in the England-British side of things. The gun is a .303 British caliber. See right there. Stout cartridge, 30 caliber. I'll show it next to a few other rounds in a second in the video so you can see just how big of a round I'm talking about here. It is stout. The internal magazine on the firearm holds 10 rounds, which is a little uncommon for a full caliber service rifle at the time, the era. It was able to be fed, like most were, through the top with stripper clips that you would line up right here in the groove and then feed the rounds down. However, also, it has a detachable magazine, something you don't see too often in old military rifles, especially ones like this one that was made in 1918, believe it or not. So yeah, really super cool gun. It's really cool to have something that's well over 100 years old and still functions flawlessly, and still very accurate rifle to this day. Another really cool thing that's really different about these SMLE rifles is it's what is known as a cock-on-close design. So most bolt-action rifles, when you work the bolt and bring it to the trigger, it'll cock the hammer. But on the Lee Enfield, it doesn't cock the hammer until you close the bolt. So you get a little resistance right there at the end. You have to push it hard forward and then close. And now you can see the hammer is locked back. And when you pull the trigger, it releases the hammer, firing pin, everything go forward, bang, run the bolt. Super cool design, very different. And if you want to close the bolt and not engage the hammer, what you have to do is, see if I can do this the best way I can on camera, you have to pull the trigger while the bolt is back and then push it forward, and when you do, the hammer does not cock. So it closes it with the hammer down, and that'll save your springs and everything if you're putting it in storage for a little while. Also, another super cool thing about these Lee Enfields is they are covered all over the place in really interesting proof marks and stamps. Learning how to read those stamps and proof marks and knowing what each one means and where those stamps originated from can tell you a lot about the history of the different rifles that you'll come across. This one in particular was really cool to me because although it was a 1918 manufacture, there are two different sets of serial numbers on it, which is really odd. And I had to do my research and reach out to a few forums online to find out that there was a deal going on in the 1920s when a lot of revolution was happening in Ireland, and the British were not allowed to necessarily arm another country's people or militia, whatever it is. I'm a little bit foggy on the history on that. But long story short, they took integral pieces off of rifles, so they weren't complete rifles, and then sent them over to these other countries where they would be, whatever part was taken off was put back in with a new serial number, and then they weren't necessarily arming another country. Those countries built their own firearms. This one was sent to Ireland in the 1920s with no barrel, and they rebarreled it in early mid-20s, and that's where the second set of serial numbers comes from on here. One set of serial numbers from manufacturing England, and the other for the barrel repressing in Ireland, which is really kind of cool. So this rifle went through 2 wars, 2 conflicts at least in its time. Super cool. So just to show you the size of these rounds that we're talking about here, I've got a few arranged left to right. Starting on the left, we have the 22, very common, we all know it, the 45 ACP, shot from the 1911, we just did a video on the other day. The standard current US service round, the 5.56 by 45. Another common NATO caliber that we use a lot today in our service, the 308. And on the very end here is the 303 British that the Lee Enfield fires. One very interesting thing to note about the round is if you look here at the bottom, the base of the cartridge, you see that the rim at the bottom extends wider than the actual casing. That is because the 303 is what is known as a rimmed cartridge. And that's important to note for one very specific reason. So with a rimmed cartridge, like the 303 British here, you have to pay attention to how you load the rounds into the firearm, because if you do not pay attention, you can get what is known as rim lock. And what is rim lock? Now that is when you have a rimmed cartridge, you can see that these rims on the base will lock up on each other. So if the round in the top of the magazine has its rim sitting behind the round and underneath it, the next round in the mag, when you go to ram the bolt to pick up the round, it will lock up and you can't close the bolt. And you have to manually get inside, pull the round out, do a bunch of stuff. It's not fun. So when you load it, you have to make sure that the rounds are stacked properly in the magazine with the top rim, bottom, so on and so forth. That way you do not get rim lock when you are running the bolt.